have you got the ability to laugh at yourself as much as others? I look at my friends and I think, actually, most of my best friends, if they didn't have the ability to laugh at themselves, I couldn't really be friends with them.
Right, of course.
And if they couldn't let me mock them in the way that I'm quite happy to be mocked myself, which I am, I'm not sure I could be a friend of someone like that. Because I think it's such a key component to surviving life. Is
That's how you transcend your own stupidity.
We're all pretty absurd, right? And I think that once you realize that, there's a great scene in Fawlty Towers, one of the great comedy series of all time. Only 12 episodes ever got made with John Cleese. There's a great scene where he's got this cast of completely ridiculous characters in the hotel from hell. And they're all bonkers. And at one stage, Cleese, his character Basil Fawlty, is the most bonkers of all. And he's standing in the middle of them. He goes, my God, he said, am I the only normal person around here? And it always makes me laugh out loud. Because actually, none of us are normal. The beauty of being a human being is we're all slightly abnormal. We're all slightly nuts. I think everyone has it in them to be slightly nuts. But the common thread of my friends and people that I gravitate to is an ability for me to take the piss out of them and they laugh. And you can only really be like that if you yourself can take it, which I can. There's very little that would ever upset me, or that I wouldn't laugh at if it's a joke at my expense. And I think that can be a disarming quality with people.
I've done a couple of interviews of some of your increasingly famous, internationally famous UK subjects. So I talked to Nigel Farage this week and Tommy Robinson. So I want to ask you about a number of people on the UK political front. So let's start with Keir Starmer. So in Canada, we have a Liberal government, although it's not a Liberal government. It's a radical socialist government. Trudeau is farther to the left by a large margin than our leftist political party has been traditionally. And I got to tell you, it's a bit of a disaster, you might say. Canada now has, our GDP is 60% per capita of that of the US, right? We have real estate prices that are twice as expensive. And those are just the things we know about. And so I would say the leftist tilt in Canada over the last 9 years has been a much worse disaster than we even know yet. And now I can understand why people here turfed out the Conservatives because, well, by my estimation, they weren't Conservatives at all. But God only knows what sort of pack they've brought in. So what are your thoughts about, well, what do you think's on the table for the UK for the next 4 years?
Well, I've interviewed Starmer a few times.
Yeah.
I did him for my Life Story show, which is like a 2.5 hour interview. And I think, probably like you probably believe, that if you interview someone for 2.5 hours, they can't hide the entire time.
Yeah.
You're going to work out really what they're like. I think he's fundamentally a decent guy.
Yeah.
I think he's a kind of regular guy. There's nothing particularly flamboyant or special about him. He's a self-made man. He had a very tough upbringing. His mother was very ill for a very long period of time, and he effectively was her carer a lot of the time. A bit disenfranchised from his dad, no money, and he rose to become the top of the legal profession, Director of Public Prosecutions, the top lawyer in the country, and now he's risen to be the top politician in the country, to be Prime Minister. That's a pretty remarkable achievement.
Yeah.
He's no silver spoon guy at all. He is somebody who drifted out to the far left in the Jeremy Corbyn era, said he thought Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister. That's a blotch on his thought process, because Corbyn would have been a total mad far left disaster. But interestingly, and I think encouragingly, Starmer is not so intransigent in his views that he's not prepared to change. The example being the issue of trans women in women's sport. You know, he started off by saying that, you know, all trans women are women and should be treated as such.
Even the violent rapists.
Which
just, you know, it's a problem. Those edge cases.
You and I completely agree about this. It's obviously preposterous. But it's interesting to watch him change the position. So now I think he now says 99% of women don't have penises, was his last statement on the thing. He's come a long way, right? So, you know, I think he understands that to be successful in Britain as a politician, you've got to occupy the centre ground. Really. Historically, almost every leader we've had in modern times effectively has been in the centre ground. From Blair to Thatcher to, you know, you go back and you pick any of them. They're all we're pretty well hovering in this kind of area. And then you have the extremities who create a lot of noise, but never actually get elected. Yeah. And I think that Starmer's done very, very well, notwithstanding the uselessness of his opposition, to bring his party more to the centre. And he's understood he's got to have Middle England feeling he's not a threat. Now, the challenge for him is there's no money. You know, we're a pretty bankrupt country at the moment in terms of money to spend as a government. He's already ruled out 3/4 of all tax revenue potential, saying he's not going to do this, not going to do that, not going to do this. So he's left really with a tax the rich strategy. He's going to hammer people like me. He'd hammer you if you were in this country. He's going to come after, you know, money from the houses, money from schools. He wants to put VAT on private schools, independent schools, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to raise tax for the rich and so on. I don't like politics of envy generally. And I don't think it works. So he's got to have more tools in his box. He's banking on the economy improving. He might get lucky, but you've got to have growth to do the things he wants to do about public services. Our health system is crumbling. Our education system is crumbling. Crime is soaring. You know, you go through almost any metric. The seas are full of sewage. You know, it's like everything is wrong right now. But to fix it, you've got to spend significant sums of public money. If you're going to do that without taxing 3/4 of the country, you're going to end up just taxing people who may say, you know what, I'm going to leave.
Yes,
and
or their money's going to leave.
Then you have a brain drain of the creative bosses who might be employing thousands of people, and then where you left. So I think he's got a lot of challenges, but I wouldn't underestimate him. I think anyone that's seen off the far left as he's done with his party, and he was quite.
You think he's done that fairly effectively?
He was pretty courageous in the campaign when he supported Israel pretty emphatically, despite the fact that there were a lot of, I mean, there's 5 million Muslims in this country, most of whom would have been persuaded to probably vote Labour.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that would have hurt him in the Muslim communities. I think he factored in that better to do the right thing, and we're still going to win anyway. And I think that's, you know, it was a bit of moral courage shown there. So I don't underestimate him.
What about the people around him?
I think he's got quite a smart cabinet, actually.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I do. And I think they've hit the ground running in quite a smooth way. Look, his whole strategy is going to be don't scare the horses and the children, right? Let's just steady as we go. And it may be that Britain's ready for that after a very turbulent 5 prime ministers in 5 years, the chaos of Boris Johnson, the madness of Liz Truss. You know, Rishi Sunak really got a horrible hospital pass. I think we're ready for a bit of just calm stability.
And you think he could offer that?
I think he can offer. I've already seen signs since he became prime minister of a well-organized man with a well-organized team who seem to know what they're doing, who've got a plan. And whether it works or not is another issue. Part of the Conservative problem was everything they promised they didn't deliver on. From stopping the small boats coming over from France, from the raging legal migration, which has gone from tens of thousands to 700,000 people last year, net legal migration, completely unsustainable. The Tories kept promising we're going to take it back down to tens of thousands. They never did. They said they'd sort out the NHS waiting list. They're the worst they've ever been. You know, my mother had a heart attack 8-9 months ago and was left on a trolley in accident and emergency out in the corridor for 7 hours, having been diagnosed with a heart attack. And there were 35 other people on trolleys out with her.
That's the state in Canada too.
This is modern day Britain.
Yeah.
Now, he's not a Trudeau. You know, I watched a clip of Trudeau when he's with students and someone says something about mankind. He went, oh, no. We say people kind. So he would literally change the most iconic line in the history of modern world, which was
he would also insist that you change it too.
Right, but you know, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong, the first lunar landing, would now have to be one small step for a person, one giant leap for peoplekind.
Yeah,
that's world
so poetic
that Trudeau wants. He is insanely woke, and the truth is, if you are like that, it doesn't work, as Canada sadly is seeing. I don't think Starmer's like that. I think he's much more pragmatic. Also think you don't get to be Director of Public Prosecutions in this country, the #1 lawyer in the country, if you're not a smart person. And I think he is a smart person. But can he somehow navigate us to a better place? Possibly. Is he going to be a transformative prime minister where we all wake up in 2-3 years and think, wow, the Starmer revolution? I don't think so.
Watching a congressman from the U.S. today claiming that the critics of Biden after the last debate are ableist.
Yeah,
right? I mean, well, I don't even know what to think about that. It's like, I see. So now here's your theory. Your theory is that it doesn't matter whether the president of the United States is able, because all discrimination between being able and unable is a form of prejudice. And that even applies with regards to the president of the United States. And so that means that all the people who are concerned that there might be something astray with him cognitively, that we're being lied to about at a level that's almost inconceivable, are now equivalent to like KKK racists from the 1940s. And that's your argument.
And by the way, in relation to the same critique of his vice president, should you dare to criticize Kamala Harris, you are de facto a racist. That
the only reason Gavin Newsom said that the other day.
The only reason that you would feel the need to criticize this black woman who's vice president is not that she's been completely incompetent in her job, which any impartial observer would conclude, but it has to be because of her skin color and her gender. And
even though that's why she was put in the damn position to begin with.
Joe Biden said publicly, I want a black woman. Right. And then he gets a black woman who is massively underperformed, which hasn't helped him at all. But no one's allowed to criticize her, because if you do, you'll be called a racist. And I find that one of the laziest tropes out there in modern society. It's a way of, I think we've discussed it before, but it's a way of stifling honest debate. It's a way of censoring legitimate criticism.
It's a way of asserting moral superiority that's unearned. That's a lovely
and actually, none of them really mean it. I mean, it is the genuine epitome of virtue signaling. What they're really, I mean, I remember for example, I remember, when the George Floyd, murder happened, and it was a horrific incident, of course. But I remember that soon after that, there was a Black Square Day announced on Instagram, where everybody had to signal their virtue about this by doing a black square. Now, I'd spent the entire morning on Good Morning Britain hosting debates about the George Floyd killing and showing enormous empathy and support for Black Lives Matter and what had happened. This is very early stages before a lot of stuff came out about the organization Black Lives Matter, which put a rather different gloss on them. But the principle that, this had been a terrible killing, that this man should never have been killed, that it was possibly racially motivated, all that kind of stuff. I was debating this with an absolutely open mind and being very empathetic to all these arguments. But I didn't do my black square on Instagram. And my sons got in touch with me and said, Dad, you got to do your black square. I went, why? We're getting criticized because you haven't done it. And I actually had posted a picture of a bottle of rosé wine, because I was having one in my local square. And I hadn't given any thought to the rule that I had to signal my virtue about this thing. And I then got absolutely annihilated by people saying, how dare you do this? Where is your black square? And I remember thinking, but all of you are going to go right back tomorrow morning to posting inane, self-aggrandizing photographs of yourselves on beaches or in nightclubs or in Ferraris or whatever. None of this means anything to you. Whereas tomorrow morning, I'll be back on air doing another 3 hours of debate about this to try and get the society in the world in relation to this issue back to a place of better racial justice. Now, which one is going to have a better effect on influencing people's minds?
There you go, be an ableist again.
Right. And that's the point, is that I found it such a trite and kind of pointless example of this cult of virtue signaling.
It's worse than that. So I just finished a book, which is going to be published in November, and I walked through a sequence of biblical stories trying to explain what they meant psychologically. And I spent some time on the book of Exodus for obvious reasons. And there's a commandment in there that people misapprehend. So I think it's the third commandment. Don't use God's name. Thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. And people think that means don't swear or curse. And it sort of means that. There's a peripheral meaning that is associated with that casual use of the sacred, let's say. But that isn't what it means. It means don't claim divine virtue when you're working for your own purposes. And the same thing happens in the gospel account, say, because the Pharisees, who are Christ's primary enemy, are the people he accuses of utilizing the sacred, the deepest, so you could say compassion even, given its proper place, for their own self-aggrandizement. They're praying in public. They're trying to occupy the best seats in the marketplace. They want the best seats in the synagogues, etc. That's the accusation. And so that virtue signaling, it's not merely, it's an expression of an unbelievably deep and ignorant narcissism, right? It's part of the victim-victimizer narrative, first of all, which explains all of history with no cognitive effort. And then it's these performative gestures that make you morally virtuous.
Yes.
Right? And one of the consequences of that, too, is as soon as you're morally virtuous like that, you get to specify the victimizer who's your enemy and tear them into shreds, and that's actually a moral act. And I mean, you saw a bit of that, you said, with the black square.
Yeah.
But it's an unbelievably pathological...
But it was fascinating to me that my own children, all in their 20s at the time, that they were being contacted by friends saying, why has your dad done this picture of a bottle of wine? Where's his black square?
Yeah.
And they were kind of damned by association.
Yeah.
And were keen for me to rectify this problem.
Yeah.
And I had to say,
but there's a tribal signaling there too.
Yeah. And I said, guys, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to feel bullied into doing something that I think actually is pointless and trite. And that all the people doing it don't really care much about this cause and will be very quickly back to their normal work on Instagram, which is pumping themselves up and showing off and all the things people do on Instagram. I said, I'm just not going to play this game.
Well, there's no cost to doing it, right? To putting up a black square.
Right.
You can indicate
there's
someone's
no sacrifice.
commitment. That's exactly right.
There's no sacrifice. There's no hard work
Why did you
required.
use sacrifice? Is that?
Well, because I think that to really support a cause, whatever that cause may be, at some point you have to show a bit of sacrifice to that cause. You have to commit time or money or resources or whatever it may be to support reputation, put your head over the parapet. There has to be an element of risk and an element of sacrifice. Now, if all you're doing is following the hashtag trend of the day, there's no sacrifice, there's no risk taking. In fact, it's the opposite.
The reverse. Yes,
it's actually more courageous to say, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. And it's a far more tangible and effective way of trying to get racial injustice to a better place.